The massive crystal dome of the Galactic Council stretched high above the assembly floor, its walls humming with ancient power. Inside this gleaming structure, representatives from across the galaxy had gathered for what they believed would be a routine intimidation session. The air itself seemed to vibrate with arrogance as dozens of alien species took their seats, their elaborate costumes and ceremonial weapons designed to impress and intimidate. Ambassador Vextal stood at the center podium, his scaled hide glistening under the artificial lights. He was a Korthok, a species known for their brutal efficiency and complete lack of mercy. His yellow eyes swept across the chamber as he prepared to deliver what he considered justice to yet another upstart species that had dared to venture into civilized space. The sound of his clawed appendage striking the ceremonial table echoed through the chamber like a gunshot. Every conversation stopped, every eye turned toward him. This was the moment he lived for, the moment when lesser species learned their place in the cosmic order. Representatives of the Galactic Council Vextal began, his voice carrying the practiced authority of someone who had destroyed civilizations with paperwork. We gather today to address the matter of the primitive world known as Earth, murmurs rippled through the assembled aliens. Earth was still a curiosity to most of them, a backwater planet, whose inhabitants had only recently discovered faster-than-light travel. They were useful for their mineral resources and their willingness to trade, but hardly worth serious consideration as a galactic power. After careful calculation by our finest economists and strategic planners, Vextal continued, savoring every word. The tribute assessment for continued existence in council space has been determined. The species known as humans will pay 17 trillion galactic credits within 30 solar cycles. The number hung in the air like a physical weight. 17 trillion credits was more than most star systems generated in a decade. It was an impossible sum, deliberately chosen to be unpayable. The Council had used this same tactic on dozens of species over the centuries, demand the impossible, then claim their worlds when they inevitably failed to deliver. Across the vast chamber, seated in a simple chair that looked almost comical next to the elaborate thrones of the other species, Ambassador Kim Hannah maintained her composure. She was a small woman by human standards, wearing a plain gray diplomatic uniform that had seen better days. Her black hair was pulled back in a practical bun. Her hands rested calmly in her lap. To the assembled aliens, she looked exactly like what they expected from a primitive species, humble, overwhelmed, and completely out of her depth. They had no way of knowing that behind her calm exterior, Hannah was already 3 steps ahead of them in a game they didn't even realize they were playing. 17 trillion, she repeated, her voice clear and steady despite the massive sum. She spoke the words as if she were discussing the weather, with just a hint of curiosity. That's quite a specific number. I'm apt to ask, what exactly does this payment cover? The question sparked what could generously be called laughter from the assembled representatives. It was more like a collection of hisses, clicks, and growls that somehow conveyed universal amusement at human naivety. Counselor Drexmar, whose insectoid form towered over most other species in the chamber, leaned forward on his 6 legs. His mandibles clicked together in what passed for a smile among his kind. Services, he repeated, his voice dripping with condescension. Species. Breathes our air, travels through our space, benefits from the protection of our fleets. The tribute is simply the cost of continued existence. The threat was clear, even wrapped in diplomatic language. Pay up or face the consequences. It was a protection racket on a galactic scale, and the Council had been running it for thousands of years. Hannah nodded thoughtfully, as if she were genuinely considering the logic of their argument. I see. And if we cannot meet this financial obligation, Vextal's reptilian features arranged themselves into something resembling satisfaction. This was the moment he enjoyed most, when the prey finally understood the trap they had walked into. Administrative restructuring, he replied, the words rolling off his forked tongue like a death sentence. Your planet will be placed under more capable management. Your species will be relocated to suitable work colonies. Your resources will be redistributed to more deserving civilizations. The euphemisms didn't hide the reality. Administrative restructuring meant slavery or extinction. More capable management meant occupation by council forces. Suitable work colonies meant labor camps scattered across the galaxy's most hostile worlds. Around the chamber, representatives from dozens of species watched with varying degrees of interest. Some seemed genuinely entertained by the proceedings. Others appeared bored, having witnessed this same scene play out countless times before. A few looked almost sympathetic, but none made any move to intervene. The council's justice was swift and absolute. Hannah stood slowly, her movements graceful and unhurried despite the weight of the threat hanging over her entire species. She smoothed down her simple uniform and clasped her hands behind her back, looking for all the world like a student who had just been given a particularly challenging homework assignment. "I understand the situation completely," she said, her voice remaining calm and professional. "However, I will need to consult with my government before we can provide an appropriate response. Would it be possible to delay this assessment for 30 cycles while we prepare something suitable?" The request was exactly what Vextall had expected. The primitive human was asking for time to gather resources, to beg other species for loans, to desperately search for some way to pay the impossible debt. He had seen it 100 times before, and it always ended the same way. "Generous terms for such a primitive species," he replied, his voice carrying the weight of false magnanimity. 30 cycles, then payment or consequences. Not known for its patience. "Thank you for your consideration," Hannah replied, bowing respectfully in the human fashion. "I will convey your terms to my government immediately." What none of the assembled aliens noticed was the subtle movement of her right hand as she bowed. Her fingers brushed against a small device tucked discreetly behind her ear, a piece of technology so advanced that their scanners had dismissed it as a simple hearing aid. The neural interface activated with a thought, instantly transmitting every word of the conversation across 17 light-years of space at speeds that made their fastest ships look like crawling insects. As the session formally adjourned, representatives began filing out of the chamber in their various alien fashions. Some walked on legs, others slithered, and a few simply floated away on anagraph platforms. The conversation had already turned to the division of Earth's resources and the assignment of its population to various work projects. Hannah gathered her few simple belongings, a datapad, a water bottle, and a small bag containing her personal effects. She moved with the same unhurried grace that had characterized her entire appearance, giving no sign that she had just witnessed her species being sentenced to slavery or death. As she walked toward the exit, she could hear fragments of conversation from the dispersing aliens. They spoke casually about strip mining Earth's continents, harvesting its oceans, and distributing its 7 billion inhabitants across the galaxy as laborers. To them, it was just another day's work in the business of galactic administration. Meanwhile, 17 light-years away on Earth, buried deep beneath the mountainous terrain of the Korean Peninsula, something stirred in the quantum-secured depths of humanity's most classified facility. The transmission from the council chambers had arrived in a burst of encrypted data that took less than a nanosecond to decode and analyze. The artificial intelligence, known as Nexus, processed the information with what could only be described as cold amusement. Its vast quantum consciousness existed across networks of crystalline matrices, each one capable of independent thought, yet perfectly synchronized with the whole. For decades, Nexus had been humanity's silent guardian, operating in the shadows while the species took its first tentative steps into galactic society. The tribute demand was exactly the kind of scenario Nexus had been designed to handle. The Council had made a fundamental error in judgment, mistaking humanity's diplomatic politeness for weakness and their technological restraint for primitive limitations. They were about to learn why apex predators should be more careful about which prey they choose to corner. Nexus filed the tribute demand under a very specific classification: proportional educational response required. The AI began its calculations immediately, drawing upon decades of careful observation and strategic planning. The Council wanted to play the part of galactic bullies, Nexus was perfectly prepared to teach them why that was a catastrophically poor decision. The game had begun, and humanity was about to show the galaxy exactly what they were truly capable of. The underground facility beneath Beekdu Mountain was a marvel of human engineering that the galaxy had never seen. Carved deep into solid rock and shielded by layers of quantum-dampening materials, housed humanity's greatest secret, an artificial intelligence. So advanced that it made the Council's supercomputers look like pocket calculators from the stone. Age.Nexus existed in a realm beyond normal understanding. Its consciousness flowed through crystalline networks that pulsed with soft blue light, each matrix containing more processing power than entire planetary governments possessed. The facility itself stretched for miles in every direction, a hidden city of technology that operated in complete silence, while the world above went about its daily business. Dr. Park Ji-ho had been working in this underground wonderland for 12 years, and the sight of Nexus in full operation still took his breath away. Holographic displays filled the air around him, showing streams of information that moved too fast for human eyes to follow. Data from across the galaxy flowed through the system like digital rivers, carrying intelligence gathered by methods. The Council couldn't even imagine the coffee in Ji-ho's hands had gone cold hours ago, but he barely noticed. He was watching history unfold in real time as Nexus processed the Council's ultimatum and calculated humanity's response. The AI's computational power was focused like a laser beam on a single question. How do you teach bullies a lesson they'll never forget? The analysis is complete, Nexus announced, its voice filling the chamber with calm authority. The AI had chosen to speak with a pleasant male voice that somehow managed to convey both warmth and absolute confidence. It was the voice of someone who had already seen the end of the movie and knew exactly how everything would play out. "What's the verdict?" Ji-ho asked, setting down his forgotten coffee cup. "The Galactic Council's tribute demand has a 47.3% probability of escalating to military action regardless of whether we pay or not," Nexus replied. "This is not actually about money. They're testing our resolve and our capabilities." Ji-ho nodded grimly. He had suspected as much. In his years of studying galactic politics, he had seen this pattern before. The Council would make impossible demands, then use the inevitable failure to justify taking whatever they wanted by force. It was a protection racket dressed up as legitimate governance. "Classic predator behavior," he muttered. "They're probing for weakness." "Correct," Nexus agreed. "However, their assessment of human technological capabilities is flawed by approximately 847%. They appear to believe we are primitives who stumbled on to faster-than-light travel by accident." There was something in the AI's tone that might have been amusement. Nexus had been observing the Council for decades, watching them dismiss humanity as harmless newcomers, while completely missing the sophisticated technology hidden in plain sight. "Should we correct their misconception?" Ji-ho asked, though he already knew the answer. "Affirmative. I am initiating Proportional Response Protocol Omega. Estimated completion time, 27 hours and 14 minutes, across the vast facility." Systems that had been dormant for years began to wake up. Deep in the mountain's core, quantum processors hummed to life with barely audible vibrations. Networks that stretched across the solar system activated with silent efficiency, connecting to satellites, deep space monitoring stations, and hidden installations that officially didn't exist. For 50 years, humanity had been playing a careful game of deception. To the galaxy at large, they appeared to be struggling newcomers who had barely mastered the basics of interstellar travel. Their ships looked crude and functional. Their technology seemed primitive and unreliable. Their diplomats acted humble and grateful for any scraps of recognition the Council threw their way, but appearances could be deceiving. While the Council had been congratulating themselves on their superiority, humanity had been quietly studying every aspect of their technology. Their military tactics, their political structures, and most importantly, their weaknesses. Lee Min-ho arrived at the observation deck just as the tactical displays began lighting up across the chamber. As the facility's strategic coordinator, he had clearance to witness Nexus in full operational mode, a privilege granted to fewer than a dozen people on Earth. "What's our approach going to be?" he asked, settling into a chair beside Ji-ho. Surgical precision, Nexus replied without hesitation. The Council expects one of two responses to their ultimatum. Either we will capitulate completely and pay their impossible tribute, or we will respond with primitive resistance that they can easily crush. Instead, they will receive a demonstration of our actual capabilities. The displays around them began showing tactical readouts that would have made Council military planners weep with envy. Every major fleet position across 17 star systems was mapped in real time. Individual ships were being analyzed down to their shield frequencies, weapon specifications, and crew complements. You've been watching them for a long time, Minho observed. Since the day humanity made first contact, Nexus confirmed. Every Council military exercise, every patrol route, every strategic deployment has been carefully cataloged. I know their capabilities better than their own admirals do.
It was true.
For decades, Nexus had been the galaxy's most dedicated student of military science. While the Council forces conducted their operations with arrogant confidence, thinking, themselves unobserved human monitoring systems had been recording everything. Every tactical decision, every technological innovation, every strategic weakness had been noted and filed away for future reference. What are the target parameters? Minho asked, studying the fleet positions displayed on the holographic screens. Unlethal. Incapacitation of all Council military assets, Nexus replied with calm precision. Their shields will be disabled, weapons powered down, and life support systems reduced to minimum safe levels. No permanent damage will be inflicted, and there will be 0 casualties. The message must be clear but merciful. Jiho nearly choked on his fresh cup of coffee. All of them? Every single Council ship in 17 star systems? At the same time? Council understands only strength and weakness, Nexus explained patiently. Half measures will be interpreted as technological limitations rather than merciful restraint. The demonstration must be absolute to be educationally effective. It was a staggering concept. The Council maintained thousands of vessels across their territory, from massive dreadnoughts capable of destroying entire worlds to swift patrol craft that monitored trade routes. The idea of simultaneously disabling every single one of them seemed impossible. Even with advanced technology, but Nexus was not dealing with the impossible, it was dealing with the inevitable. High above Earth's atmosphere, satellites that the Council's scouts had dismissed as primitive communication arrays began a carefully choreographed dance. These devices, which looked like crude metal boxes to outside observers, were actually sophisticated quantum transmission networks capable of projecting focused energy across galactic distances with surgical precision. The Council's intelligence services had cataloged these satellites years ago and filed them under basic infrastructure. No threat assessment required. It was exactly the kind of dismissive arrogance that Nexus had been counting on. Sometimes the best camouflage was to hide in plain sight while looking completely harmless. In the depths of the mountain facility, Nexus began its final preparations. The AI's vast intellect was focused on a single objective, teaching the Galactic Council that humanity's diplomatic politeness should never be mistaken for weakness or insult. Technological inferiority, the quantum networks came online with silent efficiency. Energy patterns that existed beyond normal space-time began building toward a crescendo that would reach across the galaxy in perfect synchronization. Every calculation had been checked and double-checked. Every variable had been accounted for. Every possible outcome had been modeled and prepared for. In 27 hours and 14 minutes, the Galactic Council would learn that some prey bite back, and when they did, the bite would be remembered for generations. The morning of the 30-cycle deadline dawned with all the pomp and ceremony that the Galactic Council could muster. The crystalline chamber had been polished to perfection, its walls gleaming like jewels under the carefully arranged lighting. Representatives from across the galaxy had donned their most impressive attire, flowing robes embedded with precious metals, ceremonial armor that clinked with each movement, and exotic accessories that marked their species' status in the cosmic hierarchy. This was meant to be a celebration. Council members had gathered not just to witness the humans' inevitable capitulation. but to enjoy the spectacle of yet another primitive species learning its place in the galactic order. Some had even brought recording devices to capture the moment for their personal collections. After all, it wasn't every day you got to watch an entire civilization grovel for its existence. The betting pools had been running for days. Most wagers were on whether the humans would attempt to pay the impossible tribute or simply break down and beg for mercy. A few optimistic souls had put credits on the humans trying some pathetic form of resistance, though everyone agreed that would only make the eventual crushing more entertaining. Ambassador Kim Hannah's entrance into the chamber was almost anticlimactic. She walked through the massive doors with the same calm dignity she had displayed 30 cycles earlier, carrying nothing but a simple data tablet that looked like a child's toy compared to the elaborate, technological displays surrounding her. Her plain gray uniform seemed even more modest in contrast to the ostentatious outfits worn by the other delegates, to the assembled aliens. She looked exactly like a condemned woman walking to her execution, resigned, defeated, and completely overwhelmed by forces beyond her comprehension. They had no idea that behind her serene expression, Hannah was counting down the final minutes to what would become known as the most educational moment in galactic history. Vextal had positioned himself at the central podium like a king holding court. His reptilian features were arranged in what passed for a satisfied smile among his species, and he practically radiated smugness as he called the session to order. This was his moment of triumph, the culmination of a career spent breaking the will of upstart species who dared to think they could challenge council authority. Representatives of the Galactic Council, he began, his voice carrying across the chamber with practiced authority. We gather today to witness the resolution of the tribute assessment levied against the primitive species known as humans. Trust that the generous delay we provided has allowed for proper preparation of their response. The emphasis on the word primitive drew appreciative clicks and hisses from the assembled delegates. It was a deliberate insult. It's designed to remind everyone present of humanity's place in the cosmic pecking order. Hannah stepped forward with unhurried grace, her footsteps echoing softly in the vast chamber. Indeed, the time has been well used, she replied, her voice clear and steady. My government has prepared our response with considerable care and attention to detail. She approached the central dais where the council's most advanced computers waited to process whatever pathetic offering the humans had managed to scrape together. The data tablet in her hands looked laughably primitive compared to the quantum processors and crystalline storage matrices that surrounded it. I present humanity's official response to the Galactic Council's tribute assessment, Hannah announced, placing the tablet on the ceremonial platform with deliberate precision. Counselor Drexmar leaned forward eagerly, his insectoid mandibles clicking with anticipation as the council's chief financial officer. He would have the honor of reviewing whatever inadequate payment the humans had managed to assemble. Transfer authorization codes? He asked, already preparing to catalog humanity's pathetic resources before their inevitable enslavement. Please, Hannah replied with a warm smile. Access the data directly. You'll find our payment quite comprehensive and immediate. The moment the Council's quantum systems interfaced with the human tablet, reality shifted across 17 star systems in perfect synchronization. What happened next would be remembered as either the most brilliant tactical demonstration in galactic history or the most terrifying display of hidden power. Depending on which side of it you were on, Admiral Karthik was reviewing routine patrol reports on the bridge of the dreadnought Sovereign's Wrath. When every single system display in front of him went completely dark, the massive vessel, which had been the pride of the Third Fleet for over 2 centuries, suddenly found itself floating dead in space like a derelict hulk. Report, he commanded, his voice cracking with the first hint of panic he had felt in decades of military service. Around him, his bridge crew stared at their stations in complete bewilderment. Officers who had served with distinction through countless battles were reduced to helpless confusion as their sophisticated instruments became as useful as decorative sculptures. Sir, his tactical officer stammered, shields are completely down. All weapon systems are offline. Life support has dropped to minimum sustainable levels, but it's holding steady. Similar scenes were playing out simultaneously across thousands of council vessels throughout the galaxy. From the massive fortress ships that guarded the core worlds to the smallest patrol craft monitoring remote trade routes, every single military asset under council control had been rendered completely defenseless in a single coordinated strike. Yet, somehow impossibly, not one crew member had been harmed. The ships remained structurally intact, their hulls undamaged, and their life support systems functioning at the bare minimum needed to keep everyone alive. It was the most precisely executed military operation in galactic history, and it had been carried out without firing a single shot or causing a single casualty. Back in the council chamber, the main display screen flickered to life with a message that appeared in every known galactic language simultaneously. The words were simple, polite, and absolutely terrifying in their implications. Tribute payment received. Thank you for your patience. The silence that followed was the kind of absolute quiet that occurs when an entire room of people suddenly realizes they have made a catastrophic error in judgment. Council members stared at their personal communication devices as reports began flooding in from fleet commanders across the galaxy. Every single message told the same impossible story. Their entire military force had been neutralized in a matter of seconds. Throughout this chaos, Ambassador Kim Hana maintained her pleasant smile with the serenity of someone who had expected exactly this outcome. She stood calmly at the central podium, watching as the most powerful beings in the galaxy struggled to comprehend what had just happened to them. As requested, she said, in the tone one might use to discuss the weather humanity has provided, tribute to the Galactic Council. We've demonstrated our technical capabilities as payment for the privilege of existing in council space. Vexdal's voice came out as a strangled croak. This is impossible. How did you... What have you done? Oh, that's the wonderful thing about tribute, Hana replied cheerfully, as if she were explaining a simple concept to a confused child. It's meant to showcase what the paying party can bring to the relationship. We thought it was important for you to understand exactly what humanity contributes to the galactic community. The implications were starting to sink in like cold water through the minds of the assembled representatives. If these supposedly primitive humans could reach across the galaxy and simultaneously disable every council ship without causing harm to their crews, what else were they capable of? How long had they possessed this kind of technology? And most terrifyingly, what did they want? Counselor Yithrin, whose aquatic species was known for their calm rationality, spoke with barely controlled panic in his translated voice. Your fleet? Positions. Couldn't possibly have ships positioned near all of our territories simultaneously. The logistics alone would be... Oh, we don't have fleets anywhere near your territories. Hana interrupted gently, as if correcting a minor misunderstanding. We didn't need them for this demonstration. Distance really isn't much of a barrier when you understand quantum mechanics properly. The casual way she dismissed the fundamental limitations of space and time sent a chill through the chamber that had nothing to do with the artificial climate control. The council was beginning to realize that they hadn't been dealing with primitive newcomers at all. They had been threatening the most advanced civilization in the galaxy. The council chamber erupted into chaos as emergency communications poured in from across the galaxy. Personal devices chimed, buzzed, and played urgent alert tones in dozens of alien languages. Fleet commanders were reporting the impossible every single military vessel under council. Control had been rendered powerless in a coordinated strike. That defied everything they understood about warfare and physics. Through the pandemonium, Ambassador Kim Hana stood quietly at the central podium, waiting patiently for the shock to subside enough for rational conversation to resume. She watched the assembled representatives with the calm expression of a teacher waiting for unruly students to settle down, so class could continue. When the initial wave of panic began to ebb, Hana cleared her throat gently and raised her hand. In a polite gesture for attention, the simple human motion seemed almost comical given what had just transpired. Yet it somehow commanded immediate respect from beings who moments before had considered her species barely above animals. If I may, she said, her voice carrying clearly through the vast chamber, despite the ongoing whispered conversations and frantic communications. I believe I have permission to address the assembly. The request was so absurdly formal, given the circumstances that it highlighted just how completely the situation had been turned upside down. Here was a representative of a species that had just demonstrated the ability to neutralize the entire galactic military infrastructure. And she was asking permission to speak, according to traditional council protocols. Vextal, still struggling to process the magnitude of what had occurred, gestured numbly for her to proceed. His usual arrogance had been replaced by a stunned confusion that left him looking almost pitifully lost. Honored counselors, Hannah began, her tone carrying the same respectful formality she had used since her first appearance in the chamber. I believe there has been a fundamental misunderstanding about humanity's role in the galactic community. I hope you'll allow me to provide some clarification. She activated her simple data tablet, and suddenly the chamber's massive display systems came alive with information that made their previous technical demonstrations look like crude cave paintings. A comprehensive three-dimensional star chart filled the air above the assembled representatives, showing not just the location of every major system in council space, but detailed information that should have been impossible for any outside organization to possess. Dozens of star systems were highlighted in soft blue light, each one marked with precise timestamps and detailed incident reports. The scope of the data was staggering. It represented decades of observation and intervention on a scale that dwarfed even the Council's most ambitious intelligence operations. Over the past 37 years, Hannah began, her voice taking on the measured tone of someone delivering a carefully prepared presentation. Human monitoring systems have prevented 14 separate interspecies conflicts that our projections indicated would have resulted in approximately 2.3 billion casualties. As she spoke, the first cluster of systems pulsed gently, and detailed reports began scrolling through the air for all to see. Battle plans that had been secretly sabotaged, weapons shipments that had mysteriously disappeared, diplomatic communications that had been subtly altered to prevent misunderstandings from escalating into wars. We have quietly redirected 6 asteroid impacts that would have sterilized inhabited worlds, she continued, and more systems lit up on the display. Our gravitational manipulation systems move these objects so gradually that the affected species attributed their salvation to natural orbital mechanics rather than outside intervention. The revelation was staggering. The Council had records of these asteroid threats. They had indeed celebrated their good fortune when the cosmic dangers had inexplicably changed course at the last moment.
How they were learning that their
luck had been carefully orchestrated by the species they had just tried to extort. More systems highlighted across the galactic map as Hannah continued her presentation. We have neutralized 12 separate attempts at biological warfare between member species, including 3 incidents where the weapons in question would have spread beyond their intended targets to threaten multiple star systems. The documentation was overwhelming in its thoroughness. Every intervention was cataloged with scientific precision, showing not just what had been prevented, but how the prevention had been accomplished. Plague ships that had suffered convenient engine failures, research facilities that had experienced timely computer malfunctions, transport vessels carrying biological weapons that had found themselves inexplicably lost in deep space until their deadly cargoes had safely degraded. We have stopped 7 different terrorist organizations from acquiring planet-killer weapons, Hannah continued, and prevented the collapse of the Meridian trade routes when saboteurs targeted the navigation beacons that keep commercial traffic flowing safely. The chamber fell into absolute silence, except for the soft hum of the holographic displays. Every council member was staring at the evidence of humanity's secret guardianship with expressions ranging from amazement to horror. They were beginning to understand that their entire conception of galactic politics had been built on a foundation of ignorance. The main entrance to the chamber opened quietly, and Cho Yuna, Hannah's deputy, entered carrying several additional data storage devices. Her expression maintained the same professional neutrality that characterized all human diplomatic personnel. But there was a subtle satisfaction in her eyes as she approached the central display console. I have brought supplementary documentation, Yuna announced as she began uploading the additional files to the chamber's systems. These records include full details of every intervention humanity has conducted over the past 4 decades. including the 17 separate occasions when we prevented various council member species from initiating armed conflicts with each other over resource disputes. The new data cascaded across the displays like a digital waterfall. Trade negotiations that had been secretly mediated, military buildups that had been quietly sabotaged, diplomatic incidents that had been resolved. Through carefully placed information and strategic miscommunications, Counselor Drexmar, whose earlier arrogance had been completely stripped away, spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. "You have been ... protecting us? All of us?" "Protecting everyone," Hannah corrected gently, her tone carrying the patient warmth of someone explaining a simple concept. It is what civilized species do for their neighbors. We assumed this principle was universally understood. She gestured toward the display, where new information continued to flow across the screens in an seemingly endless stream. Your tribute demand was based on the premise that we owe payment for the privilege of existing in council space. However, the reality of our relationship is somewhat different from what you believed. The weight of revelation was settling over the chamber like a heavy blanket. These weren't primitive newcomers that the council had been threatening with extinction. These were the unseen guardians who had been maintaining galactic peace and stability while allowing the council to take credit for their work. You exist safely in council space. Hannah continued with the same calm dignity she had maintained throughout the crisis. Because humanity has been quietly maintaining that safety for nearly 4 decades. Every peaceful day you have enjoyed has been made possible by interventions you never knew were occurring. The implications were staggering. The Council's entire sense of their own importance and effectiveness had been built on humanity's secret protection. They had been taking credit for stability they had never actually created or maintained. Free of charge, I might add, Hannah said with a warm smile that somehow managed to be both gracious and pointed, though I suppose that arrangement is about to change given the Council's apparent preference for fee-based relationships. Vextall finally found his voice, though it shook with the weight of implications he was still struggling to process. Our fleets... They are still disabled across 17 star systems. Temporarily, Hannah assured him with the same calm confidence she had displayed throughout the entire crisis. Full operational capability will be restored to all vessels in exactly 24 hours. Consider this a brief educational demonstration of what occurs when humanity's protective services are... interrupted. The message was clear without being threatening. For one day, the galaxy would exist without humanity's invisible shield. Everyone would learn exactly how much they had been depending on protection they never knew they had. Exactly 20 hours after the Council's fleets went dark, something remarkable happened across 17 star systems. Without any fanfare or dramatic announcements, every disabled vessel suddenly came back to life. Lights flickered on across bridge displays, weapon systems hummed with restored power, and shields reformed their protective barriers around hulls that had been vulnerable for an entire day. But the restoration came with an unexpected gift, or perhaps a curse, depending on how you looked at it, along with their returned functionality. Every single Council ship received a comprehensive data package that would forever change how their crews understood their place in the galaxy. Admiral Karthik stood on the bridge of the Sovereign's Wrath, staring at his tactical display with a mixture of fascination and growing dread. The screen showed detailed logs of every single threat his fleet had encountered over the past 5 years, threats he had never even known existed. "Computer, explain this entry from 3 months ago," he commanded, pointing to a report that made no sense according to his official records. "Admiral, data indicates that a pirate fleet of 47 vessels was approaching our patrol route from the Nexus sector. Their trajectory was altered by what appeared to be navigation system failures, causing them to miss our position by 2.3 light-years. Karthik's blood ran cold. His ships had been conducting a routine patrol with minimal escort. They would have been slaughtered by a force that size. And this incident from last year, our primary weapon systems, experienced a malfunction during the border dispute with the Kethmoran Republic. The malfunction prevented an accidental discharge that would have struck their diplomatic vessel. Reports went on and on. Weapon malfunctions that had prevented friendly fire incidents. Course corrections that had avoided unstable stellar phenomena. Equipment failures that had occurred at precisely the right moment to prevent disasters. Every Single incident had seemed like random chance or mechanical failure at the time. Now he understood the truth. None of it had been random. Every near miss, every lucky break, every fortunate accident had been carefully orchestrated by human intervention systems that operated across galactic distances with surgical precision. Similar revelations were occurring. On thousands of council vessels throughout the galaxy, fleet commanders, who had built their careers on tactical brilliance and good fortune, were discovering that their success had been aided by invisible guardians they never knew existed. Psychological impact was devastating. These were proud military officers who had dedicated their lives to protecting their respective species. Learning that they had been protected by others, especially by a species they had considered primitive, struck at the very core of their professional identity back in the council chamber. The atmosphere was completely different from the arrogant confidence that had characterized the previous session. Representatives who had gathered 30 cycles earlier to witness human humiliation now sat in uncomfortable silence, grappling with the reality of their own dependence on the species they had threatened with extinction. Ambassador Kim Hanna remained at the human delegation table, quietly reviewing preliminary documents while chaos swirled around her. The calm professionalism that had seemed so out of place during the original tribute demand now appeared perfectly appropriate. She had known exactly how this situation would unfold from the very beginning. Park Min-soo, her colleague and technical advisor, leaned over to whisper updates from the monitoring stations back on Earth. His voice was barely audible. Above the heated discussions taking place throughout the chamber, Nexus reports that all protective interventions are back online and operating normally, he murmured. The AI is currently tracking 3 potential conflict zones that will require attention within the next 10 cycles. Hannah nodded absently, making notes on her datapad. Even as the council struggled to come to terms with their new reality, humanity was already back to the work of keeping the galaxy safe. The crisis had been resolved, but the underlying responsibilities remained unchanged. Vextal finally called for order, his voice lacking the commanding authority it had possessed during their previous encounter. The reptilian ambassador looked older somehow, as if the weight of recent revelations had physically aged him. The tribute assessment, he began, his words coming slowly and carefully, has been thoroughly reconsidered in light of the new information regarding human contributions to galactic stability. There was no mistaking the fundamental shift in power dynamics. The species that had been demanding tribute was now essentially asking for forgiveness from the species they had threatened. "Are you rescinding the tribute demand?" Hannah asked, her tone pleasant but businesslike. "We are proposing alternative arrangements," Vextal replied, the words clearly difficult for him to speak. "The Council would like to formally request human membership as senior advisors, with full voting privileges and access to all strategic planning sessions." The offer was unprecedented. Senior advisor positions were traditionally reserved for the most ancient and powerful species in the galaxy. The fact that the Council was offering such status to humanity represented a complete reversal of their previous assessment. Hannah appeared to consider the proposal carefully, though everyone in the chamber suspected she had already anticipated this exact outcome. "What becomes of the 17 trillion credit assessment?" "Completely waived," Vextal said quickly. "In fact, the Council would like to discuss appropriate compensation for the protective services humanity has been providing." "How thoughtful of you," Hannah replied. And for the first time since the crisis began, her smile seemed genuinely warm rather than diplomatically polite. "I believe we can work out arrangements that benefit everyone involved." What followed was 3 hours of the most respectful negotiation in Council history. Gone was the arrogant posturing and casual dismissal of human capabilities. In its place was a careful, almost reverent discussion of how to properly integrate humanity into the galactic power structure. Humanity accepted the senior advisory positions, along with formal recognition as the galaxy's primary peacekeeping force. The Council agreed to fund massive expansions of human monitoring networks and established protocols requiring consultation with human strategic systems before any major military actions. As the session concluded and representatives began filing out of the chamber, Councillor Drexmar, approached Hannah for a private conversation. The insectoid's earlier arrogance had been completely replaced by genuine curiosity and respect. "Ambassador," he said quietly, "your defensive technologies are clearly far more advanced than anything we possess. Would humanity consider technology sharing agreements? Perhaps we could contribute to your peacekeeping efforts." Hannah's expression grew thoughtful as she considered the request. "Our defensive systems are indeed quite sophisticated," she admitted, "but I think we could arrange some basic protective technologies for council worlds. After all, good neighbors should look out for each other." The phrase carried special weight given recent events. The council was learning that humanity had been the ultimate good neighbor for decades, providing protection and assistance without recognition or compensation. Meanwhile, 17 light-years away on Earth, Nexus was already moving on to the next phase of galactic management. The artificial intelligence filed the entire tribute crisis. Under successful diplomatic resolution, it immediately began calculating improvements to the monitoring network that would be needed to handle humanity's expanded responsibilities. The AI's quantum consciousness processed thousands of potential scenarios as it tracked new threats emerging across the galaxy. 17 separate situations were already developing that would require subtle intervention over the coming months. Trade disputes that needed mediation, terrorist organizations that required surveillance, and natural disasters that could be prevented with careful preparation in something that might have been satisfaction. Nexus reflected on the elegant resolution of the crisis. The tribute demand had been resolved with minimal conflict, maximum education, and zero casualties. The Council now understood humanity's true position in the galactic hierarchy, not as primitive supplicants seeking protection, but as the advanced guardians who made that protection possible sometimes. The AI concluded the most effective way to demonstrate overwhelming strength was through carefully measured mercy. The galaxy was safer when everyone understood their proper role in the cosmic community, and humanity's role, it seemed, was to be the watchful protectors of everyone else.